Some of the strongest and most resilient individuals in the world aren't those who fought grand, visible battles, but rather those who endure quiet, solitary struggles, often in complete silence. Their resilience is not born from applause or recognition, but from private wars waged in the shadows of their upbringing. This is especially true for Sigma males. While society often paints childhood as a blissful time, a golden chapter filled with innocence, laughter, and unconditional love, the truth for many Sigma males stands in stark contrast. For them, childhood wasn't a place of safety or joy, but a chapter marked by emotional isolation, confusion, and a burden of understanding that far exceeded their years. These individuals didn't fit neatly into the typical childhood roles. They weren't the outspoken rebels craving attention, nor were they the cherished golden children who received constant praise and affirmation. Instead, they were the quiet ones, watchful, introspective, and hyper-aware. They were the children who noticed the subtle shifts in tone, the unspoken tension in a room, or the hidden sadness behind a parent's smile. From an early age, they developed a deep emotional sensitivity and an acute awareness of human behavior, not because it was nurtured, but because it was necessary for survival. This early emotional awakening shaped them in profound ways. What distinguishes a Sigma male isn't merely his independence or stoic calmness. It's the invisible emotional scars he carries, remnants of wounds no one else saw him endure. These scars didn't weaken him. They refined him. They taught him self-reliance, not out of choice, but out of necessity. Over time, he stopped seeking validation from others because he had learned a painful truth that it was rarely offered. Instead, he turned inward, finding strength and clarity in solitude. If you see yourself in this description, if your childhood felt more like a silent battlefield than a playground, know this. Your detachment is not coldness, your independence is not apathy, and your solitude is not antisocial behavior. These are the tools you develop to navigate a world that never quite understood or embrace your depth. You're not broken. You're forged, tempered by hardship into something unshakable. This reflection isn't meant to dwell on the past or reopen old wounds. Rather, it is an invitation to understand and honor the path you've walked. By acknowledging the pain you once endured, you reclaim the strength it cultivated. What was once a source of silent suffering becomes a foundation of your quiet power. In this journey, we will explore 12 deep emotional wounds that many Sigma males carry from childhood, wounds that, rather than destroy them, ultimately shape their unbreakable resilience. 1. Emotionally inconsistent parenting made him emotionally self-regulating. For most children, parents represent a foundation of emotional security, a dependable refuge when the outside world becomes too much. But for the Sigma male, this foundation was unstable, often crumbling under the weight of emotional inconsistency. His early years were shaped not by the predictable comfort of nurturing parents, but by a jarring fluctuation in emotional responses. One day, a parent might be warm, attentive, and loving. The next, they could become cold, aloof, or completely detached. There were no warnings, no explanations, only sudden shifts in mood that left the young Sigma bewildered and emotionally disoriented. This lack of stability created a climate of constant vigilance. As a child, he was forced to become hyper-aware of his surroundings, carefully reading every facial expression, tone of voice, and body movement, trying to anticipate the emotional weather in his own home. Was today a day for hugs and smiles or silence and distance? The unpredictability was not only confusing, it was mentally exhausting. He could never truly relax. Home, the very place meant to offer sanctuary, became a minefield of emotional uncertainty. Because he couldn't rely on his caregivers for consistent support or emotional guidance, he learned, far earlier than most, to self-regulate. Instead of turning to someone for comfort, he turned inward. He found ways to calm his own anxiety, to numb or redirect emotional pain, to hide his tears and silence his anger. He learned that expressing emotions, especially negative ones, often led to rejection or punishment rather than understanding. So he adapted. He built emotional armor not out of choice, but out of necessity. As he grew, this ability to self-soothe and remain composed became one of his defining traits. He doesn't break down in front of others, not because he lacks emotion, but because he never had the luxury of doing so. He doesn't raise his voice, not because he isn't angry, but because he knows it won't change anything. He doesn't reach out for help, not because he's arrogant, but because past experience taught him that vulnerability is a risk, not a relief. His emotional self-sufficiency gave him profound inner strength. He became his own stabilizer, his own therapist, his own source of peace. But that strength came at a cost. Behind his composed exterior is someone who has carried years of unspoken pain, quietly weathering storms that would have broken others. He processes heartbreak, disappointment, and fear in isolation, appearing calm and collected even when he's deeply wounded. So when you see a Sigma male who seems unaffected, who carries himself with quiet confidence and emotional control, understand this. He wasn't taught how to stay grounded. He had to figure out on his own. He became his own emotional anchor in a world that offered him no one to hold on to. 2. He was always the adult in the room. Childhood is meant to be a time of wonder, a space where play, imagination, and the freedom to make mistakes reign without consequence. For most, it's a protected era, safeguarded by the watchful eyes of adults who shoulder responsibility and offer guidance. But for the Sigma male, childhood was anything but carefree. From a very early age, he found himself shouldering burdens no child should have to bear, thrust into roles that required emotional maturity far beyond his years. While other children were concerned with playground squabbles, schoolyard games, and weekend cartoons, he was quietly monitoring the emotional landscape of his home. He could sense when a storm was brewing, when tensions were about to erupt, or when silence meant something was deeply wrong. There were unpaid bills that loomed like shadows, whispered arguments that escalated behind closed doors, and adult stress that seeped into every corner of his world. In response, he stepped into roles no one asked him to take on, but someone had to. He became the emotional first responder, the mediator, the stabilizing force amidst domestic turbulence. This early initiation into adult responsibilities aged him emotionally, often leaving him decades ahead of his peers in emotional insight and composure. The innocence and carefree laughter that should have filled his days were replaced by vigilance and quiet resilience. He learned to comfort others long before he ever received comfort himself. He developed the skill to de-escalate tension, to read between the lines of adults' behavior, and to anticipate problems before they became crises. He became calm under pressure, not because it came naturally, but because chaos demanded it. Living as an adult in the room meant he could never fully let his guard down. His own needs, feelings, and fears were pushed aside to maintain stability for everyone else. He carried exhaustion in his bones, but wore a composed mask to protect others from worry. Emotional labor became second nature. So natural, in fact, that few ever realized the toll it took on him. He became the one others leaned on, even though he was still just a child craving safety himself. As he grew older, this constant self-regulation hardened into fierce independence, not because he disliked others or rejected help, but because experience taught him that he was the only one he could truly count on. He stopped asking for emotional support, not out of pride, but because it rarely came. His ability to handle life on his own became both his greatest strength and his greatest burden. And yet, within that burden, something rare and extraordinary was forged, an unshakable strength that runs deep beneath the surface, a quiet endurance, a capacity to carry pain with grace, a soul tempered by experience, not jaded by it. To the world, he may seem distant or emotionally impenetrable, but in truth, he is the product of a childhood that demanded he become strong too soon, and he rose to meet that demand with silent, remarkable resilience. 3. He was gaslit into believing his intuition was wrong. Imagine being a child with a finely tuned emotional radar, someone who could sense when something wasn't right, who could pick up on the subtle cues of tension, deceit, or emotional withdrawal. This was a Sigma male in his early years, perceptive, sensitive, and deeply intuitive. But instead of being encouraged to trust these instincts, he was consistently told he was wrong. His perceptions were dismissed as overreactions. His questions were labeled as troublemaking. When he noticed inconsistencies, he was told he was imagining things. Phrases like, "You're too sensitive," "Stop overthinking," or "That's not what happened," became a chorus that slowly chipped away at his confidence. This wasn't just occasional denial. It was chronic gaslighting, a deliberate, or at the very least negligent, in validation of his inner truth. Every time he voiced his intuition and was shut down, a crack formed in his sense of self. Over time, he began to doubt what he felt, what he saw, and what he knew deep down to be real. For a child already feeling unseen, this was a betrayal of the highest order. The very people who were supposed to help him understand the world were convincing him to mistrust his own mind. Yet, rather than completely losing himself, something powerful happened. The very act of being gaslit into self-doubt lit a fire within him. He stopped looking to others for confirmation and instead turned inward. He learned, through pain and repetition, that his instincts were often right, even when others denied them, and that revelation became his compass. Now, as a man, his intuition is a finely honed weapon. He reads people with unnerving accuracy. He senses motives, uncovers lies, and detects manipulation before it ever surfaces. He no longer needs validation, because he learned to value his own insight above all else. What was meant to break him only built an unshakable inner trust. In a world full of noise, his internal voice is calm, clear, and deeply reliable. His self-reliance isn't arrogance. It's the hard-won reward of surviving a childhood where no one taught him to trust his instincts. So he taught himself. For he outgrew his childhood before he escaped it. Escaping a painful childhood isn't always about crossing a threshold or moving out of a house. It's a mental and emotional process, one that often begins long before any physical departure. For the Sigma male, that process started early. Even as he remained physically trapped in an environment filled with chaos, disappointment, or neglect, his mind and spirit had already started to drift elsewhere. He understood far too soon that the world around him was not a safe or nurturing place. There would be no rescue, no magical change. So he stopped waiting and started building his own inner sanctuary. Inside himself, he created a space of clarity and distance, a refuge where he could begin to grow beyond the dysfunction that surrounded him. He didn't run from reality. He observed it with a maturity well beyond his years. He absorbed the lessons embedded in the pain, studied the behaviors of those around him, and quietly vowed not to repeat their mistakes. While others were still tangled in denial or waiting for something to change, he was evolving. He wasn't just enduring his childhood. He was outgrowing it. This emotional maturity set him apart. He became someone who saw through illusions, who didn't romanticize the past or cling to what hurt him. The things that would have broken others became tools for his transformation. Every wound became a warning sign. Every betrayal became a blueprint for how to never treat others. Every instance of neglect became a reminder of what he would never accept again. What makes this journey so powerful is its subtlety. His evolution wasn't loud or attention-seeking. It was quiet, internal, and deeply personal. There were no grand declarations of rebellion, no dramatic exits, just a steady, silent rising above it all, while others remained emotionally tethered to childhood wounds. He had already begun laying the foundation for a future where he would never be that powerless again. Today, he doesn't carry his past like a burden. He wears it like armor, not to hide behind, but to protect what he's built within. His strength isn't loud, but it's undeniable, and it was forged long before he ever walked away from the place that hurt him. 5. He watched love turn toxic and took notes. For most children, love is supposed to be a source of comfort and security, a gentle force that nurtures, protects, and builds trust. But for many Sigma males, love in their formative years looked nothing like this. Instead of warmth and consistency, they saw love twisted into something conditional, manipulative, and often painful. Love was dangled in front of them like a prize, only given when they behaved a certain way, when they pleased others, or when they suppressed their own needs to maintain peace. Affection was not a constant, it was a currency. Praise came with strings attached, and emotional closeness could be revoked in a moment of disobedience or vulnerability. They watched the adults around them use love as leverage, one moment embracing, the next withdrawing into cold silence. Promises of care and support were often broken or never followed through. They witnessed arguments cloaked in the language of love, and manipulation passed off as concern. This taught them a hard truth early on. Love, in the wrong hands, can hurt more than it heals. But instead of turning bitter or emotionally detached, Sigma males became discerning. They didn't close themselves off to love. They just refused to accept imitations. Their caution isn't coldness, it's wisdom. They understand the difference between love that builds and love that breaks. They no longer mistake possessiveness or passion or guilt-tripping for concern. They learn to look beyond sweet words and grand gestures and focus on consistency, intention, and emotional honesty. Their emotional walls aren't built to shut people out. They're filters. Boundaries formed not from fear, but from experience. They guard their hearts not because they've given up on connection, but because they know the cost of opening up to the wrong person. Trust, to them, isn't given freely. It's earned slowly and deliberately. And when they do love, it's with a depth and loyalty that's unshakable, because they've studied what love shouldn't be and chose to create something better. 6. He learned early that people wear masks. Even as a child, the Sigma male could see what others missed. While most kids accepted words at face value and believed in appearances, he was already sensing the undercurrents beneath conversations, catching attention behind forced smiles and the insincerity behind polite tones. He learned very young that people often say one thing and mean another, that kindness can be a disguise, and friendliness can conceal darker intentions. These weren't paranoid thoughts. They were observations, repeated experiences that proved how easily people lie, not just others, but to themselves. He noticed how adults performed roles. Parents pretending everything was fine while clearly overwhelmed. Teachers praising while silently judging. Family members smiling through resentment. And over time, he came to understand one painful but powerful truth. Words often hide reality. People wear masks not just to protect themselves, but to manipulate, deceive, and maintain illusions. And so, he trained himself to look deeper. This awareness became both a strength and a burden. While others were charmed by surface-level pleasantries, the Sigma male was dissecting motives, reading energy, noticing inconsistencies. He developed a near-instinctive radar for authenticity. He could tell when someone's laughter was hollow, when a compliment was laced with envy, or when a promise was made with no intention of keeping it. It made him wise beyond his years, but also weary. As an adult, this clarity sets him apart. He has little patience for pretense and even less for emotional games. He values blunt honesty over polished deception, even when the truth is uncomfortable. He doesn't care for appearances, only for what's real. This makes him hard to fool, difficult to manipulate, and slow to trust, but also deeply respected by those who truly know him. His presence demands authenticity, because he refuses to play along with anything less. And though this perceptiveness can sometimes isolate him, it also protects him. In a world that often rewards masks, he remains steadfastly committed to truth. It's not cynicism, it's clarity. A hard-earned ability to see people for who they really are, not who they pretend to be. 7. He was a family's emotional dumping ground. In many households, the Sigma male was a quiet presence. The one who didn't make a fuss, didn't demand attention, and didn't cause trouble. But this silence often came at a price. Because he wasn't loud or reactive, others saw him as a safe place to unload their own emotional baggage. Parents, siblings, and even extended family members turned to him as a listener, a sounding board, or worse, a container for their unresolved frustrations. Without ever asking for it, he became the family's emotional dumping ground. From a young age, he absorbed the tension, sadness, anger, and anxiety of those around him. He sat quietly through adult arguments, comforted others without being comforted himself, and carried burdens far too heavy for a child's shoulders. Whenever he showed signs of distress or tried to express his own emotions, he was ignored, brushed off, or told to toughen up. The unspoken message was clear. Your emotions don't matter as much as everyone else's. So he adapted. He stopped opening up. He stopped expecting empathy. He learned to internalize everything, to sit with his feelings alone, to manage his inner world without help, and to never let his pain inconvenience anyone else. He became emotionally self-contained, a fortress built from quiet resilience. Yet this suppression didn't make him numb. It refined him. Instead of lashing out or breaking down, he developed extraordinary emotional intelligence. He became a master at reading the room, sensing shifts in mood and understanding others' pain, even when it wasn't spoken aloud. He learned to manage his own emotions with precision, to analyze them without being consumed by them. This self-awareness gave him strength, not the loud, performative kind, but a deep, enduring inner strength forged from years of holding everything in. He may have grown up feeling invisible, but in truth, he was developing a level of emotional depth and sensitivity that few ever reach. And while others still struggle to understand their feelings, the Sigma male navigates his emotional world with quiet mastery, because he had no choice but to become fluent in it. 8. Overly self-aware in a world that wasn't. While most children were content to live in the moment, playing, laughing, and reacting without much thought, the Sigma male was different. From a young age, his mind worked on a deeper frequency. He didn't just experience things. He analyzed them. He noticed the contradictions in people's behavior, the emotional dynamics in conversations, and the hidden meanings behind tone and expression. While other kids asked what was happening, he was already asking why. This hyper-awareness made him feel different, isolated, even. He could sense things others didn't seem to notice. When adults lied to themselves or others, he picked up on it. When peers acted out of insecurity or fear, he saw the root cause. But in a world that often values simplicity over complexity and appearance over truth, this level of perception was both a gift and a curse. He often felt like an outsider, too aware, too intense, too thoughtful for his age. And yet, this deep self-awareness gave him a unique kind of power. He understood his own emotions with clarity. He questioned his reactions, examined his beliefs, and constantly refined his inner world. While others floated through life on autopilot, he was wide awake, seeing not only what was, but what could be. This made him deliberate, focused, and mature beyond his years. His mind became a place of constant reflection, a double-edged sword that offered both wisdom and solitude. But rather than seeing his difference as a flaw, he learned to see it as a quiet superpower. While the world rushed towards surface-level connections and empty distractions, he was cultivating insight, purpose, and inner strength. In a world that often rewards conformity, his depth made him rare. And though he may have once felt alien for being so self-aware, that very trait became one of his greatest sources of personal power. 9. Too smart to be comforted by lies. Most children find comfort in the gentle lies adults tell to soothe their fears. Everything will be okay. There's nothing to worry about, or it's not as bad as it seems. These words, though often well-meaning, are meant to calm and pacify. But for Sigma males, even at a young age, these reassurances rang hollow. They didn't accept comforting words at face value. They questioned them. They sensed the cracks in adults' voices, the contradictions in their actions, and the tension hidden behind the smiles. Their minds were too sharp, too observant, to be lulled into false security. As a result, they quickly learned an uncomfortable truth. Adults lied to keep the peace, not necessarily out of malice, but out of fear, convenience, or helplessness. And once the Sigma male recognized this pattern, he stopped looking to others for reassurance. He realized that truth, no matter how uncomfortable, was far more valuable than pretty lies. He didn't want sugar-coated answers. He wanted honesty, even if it hurt, because only truth could help him prepare, adapt, and survive. This early disillusionment didn't make him bitter. It made him wise. It sharpened his discernment and gave him a deep respect for raw, unfiltered reality. Today, that mindset still defines him. He doesn't tolerate dishonesty, even when it's socially acceptable. He's the one who asks hard questions, the one who sees through manipulation, and the one who refuses to be pacified by half-truths. His strength lies not in blind optimism, but in clarity. He would rather face a painful truth head-on than live in the comfort of a well-dressed lie. 10. Overlooked talents created quiet resentment. Not all brilliance announces itself loudly. For Sigma males, their intelligence often manifested in subtle, unconventional ways. Deep thinking, abstract insight, quiet observation, creative solutions. But in environments that praise extroversion, surface-level achievement, or easily quantifiable success, their unique talents went unnoticed. Teachers, parents, and peers often overlooked their depth simply because it didn't fit into familiar mold. While louder, more performative individuals were praised and encouraged, The Sigma male was left in the shadows, quietly excelling, quietly contributing, quietly waiting to be seen. But the recognition rarely came. This taught him a painful yet defining lesson. Brilliance isn't always recognized. The world doesn't always applaud the deep thinkers, the silent problem solvers, or the emotionally intelligent observers. And that neglect planted a seed of quiet resentment. Yet instead of acting out or demanding attention, the Sigma male internalized this lesson and used it as fuel. He stopped seeking external validation and began building his self-worth from within. He learned to trust his own judgment, refine his skills in solitude, and let results speak louder than words. He proved himself not through applause, but through consistency, excellence, and integrity, often without anyone watching. This quiet determination became one of his defining traits. He doesn't crave recognition, but he notices when he's underestimated. And rather than complain, he lets his success serve as silent vindication. His overlooked talents didn't make him bitter. They made him resilient, because while others needed permission to shine, he gave that permission to himself. 11. Misunderstood by authority figures. From an early age, Sigma males often found themselves at odds with authority figures, not because they were rebellious or disruptive, but because they simply didn't conform to expected norms. In classrooms and structured environments, their quiet nature, deep thinking, and refusal to blindly follow rules were misread as apathy or disengagement. Teachers labeled them as disinterested, withdrawn, or even difficult, failing to recognize that their silence wasn't rooted in ignorance or laziness. It was rooted in disillusionment. They quickly saw through the system designed to control, rather than inspire. They noticed when rules lacked logic, when praise was given for obedience instead of insight, and when creativity was stifled in favor of conformity. They weren't interested in playing games just to earn approval. And because they questioned instead of complied, observed instead of participated, they were frequently misunderstood by those in charge. But this disconnect didn't damage them. It set them free. It taught them not to rely on external validation. It pushed them to think critically, trust their instincts, and form their own views instead of adopting someone else's narrative. They became independent thinkers not out of rebellion, but out of necessity. They realized that true intelligence isn't about regurgitating what you're taught. It's about questioning why you were taught it in the first place. Rather than being shaped by institutions, they chose to shape themselves. And while their resistance to authority may have caused friction in their youth, it ultimately forged a fierce intellectual independence that few possess. 12. The invisible child. In many families, roles are silently assigned. There's the golden child who receives praise, the rebel who draws attention through conflict, and then there's the one who simply blends into the background. The Sigma male was often this invisible child, neither celebrated nor condemned, neither fussed over nor scolded harshly. He was the one who was simply there, quiet, self-reliant, and easily overlooked. This invisibility wasn't always intentional. In chaotic or emotionally imbalanced households, attention is often a scarce resource. And because Sigma males didn't demand it, they rarely received it. Their needs went unnoticed, their achievements unacknowledged, and their struggles ignored. But rather than spiral into resentment, they adapted. They observed, listened, and learned from the shadows. Being unseen forced them to become hyper-aware. They noticed patterns others missed, deciphered unspoken dynamics, and learned to navigate life without expecting rescue. Their invisibility became a training ground for resilience and insight. It taught them to understand the world by watching it carefully, to predict outcomes without speaking, and to find strength in solitude. While others fought for attention, the Sigma male developed a quiet intelligence that thrives in the background. And though they were overlooked in childhood, they eventually grew into adults who can move through the world with precision and depth, seeing more, needing less, and thinking further ahead than anyone expects. Being invisible didn't make them weak. It made them formidable. Final words, forged in fire, tempered in silence. True strength is rarely loud and almost never comes from comfort. It is shaped in hardship, in the moments no one witnesses, in emotional storms that rage silently within. The strongest men aren't those who lived easy, uncomplicated lives. They're the ones who face adversity from the very beginning, who had every reason to collapse under the weight of it all, and yet chose to rise, chose to build, chose to become. Sigma males are not born with this strength. They are forged, like steel tempered in fire. Their resilience was shaped by pressure, heat, and solitude. They grew up in emotional chaos, often in environments that offered no comfort, no consistency, and no acknowledgement of their inner world. They were the boys no one checked on, the ones who learned to soothe themselves in silence, to figure things out without guidance, and to stand firm when everything around them felt unstable. Their scars, both emotional and psychological, are not signs of damage. They are evidence of survival. Each one tells a story of a moment when they could have fallen apart, but didn't, when they were unseen, unheard, misunderstood, and still chose to keep going. That is not weakness. That is power. So if you see your story in these words, if you felt invisible, misread, silenced, or hardened by life, know this. You are not broken. You are not too cold, too distant, or too strange. You are built differently, with depth, with clarity, with a strength that was earned, not given. You were forged in fire and tempered in silence. And that, more than anything, makes you unstoppable.